Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Are you okay?
Don't worry about it, it's just coffee.
The hospital door slammed open with enough force to crack the wall, and standing there, chest heaving with 7 years of rage, was the man she had escaped. The man who was never supposed to find her. 3 newborn babies lay sleeping in their bassinets. A billionaire CEO stood frozen beside the woman he loved. And in that doorway stood the ghost of a marriage that should have stayed dead. But to understand this moment, to truly grasp what's at stake, you need to understand everything that led to it. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you lost yourself in the process? Have you ever looked in the mirror one morning and wondered where the person you used to be had gone? Have you ever been convinced that you were the problem, only to discover years later that you were never broken at all? If you've answered yes to any of those questions, then this story is for you. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a mirror held up to one of the most dangerous forms of love that exists. The kind that looks like devotion but feels like suffocation. The kind that promises protection but delivers prison. The kind that whispers "I love you" while slowly erasing who you are. We live in a world where manipulation often wears the mask of affection, where control disguises itself as care, where the words "I'm doing this because I love you" become the chains that bind us to our own destruction. And the most terrifying part, we often don't recognize it until we're already trapped. So what happens when a woman who has been systematically erased finally remembers who she was? What happens when she finds the courage to walk away from everything she thought was love? What happens when she discovers a love that actually heals instead of harms? And what happens when both worlds, the past she escaped and the future she built, collide in a hospital room with 3 innocent lives hanging in the balance? That's exactly what we're about to explore. Welcome to Mr. Roman's Story Vault. If you're new here, welcome to the family. I'm genuinely glad you found us. If you're returning, you already know what we do here. We don't just tell stories for entertainment. We deliver truths wrapped in narratives that stay with you long after the video ends. Stories with meaning. Stories with morals. Stories that might just change the way you see love, loss, and the strength it takes to start over. Before we begin, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because this story, it's going to take you on an emotional journey from heartbreak to healing, from captivity to freedom, from a love that destroys to a love that rebuilds. Trust me, you're going to want to see this one through to the very end. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Tamrin Oakes grew up watching love in its purest form. Every morning in their Baltimore, Maryland row house, her grandparents sat across from each other at the breakfast table, hands clasped between them like teenagers who just discovered what it meant to be chosen. 47 years of marriage, and they still looked at each other like the world began and ended in that kitchen. Her grandfather would butter her grandmother's toast without being asked. Her grandmother would pour his coffee exactly the way he liked it, 2 sugars, cream until it turned the color of caramel. No words needed. Just the quiet choreography of 2 people who had learned to move as one. That's what real love looks like, baby girl, her grandmother would tell young Tamrin, fingers working through her granddaughter's thick hair every Sunday afternoon, braiding it into neat cornrows that would last the week. It's not the big gestures. It's the small things, done every day, without expectation. She would whisper prayers of protection over Tamrin as she braided, her voice low and warm. Prayers that Tamrin would find a love that honored her, that she would know her worth, that she would never settle for anything less than she deserved. Tamrin believed in those prayers the way children believe in magic. She grew up in a home where money was tight but love was abundant. Her mother worked 2 jobs, mornings at the hospital cafeteria, evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. Tamrin would do her homework at her mother's work sites, the hum of vacuum cleaners her study soundtrack. But her mother never complained, never spoke of her father, who had left before Tamrin's 2nd birthday. Instead, she spoke of possibilities. "You're going to college," her mother would say, not as a suggestion, but as an established fact. "You're going to be something great, a nurse maybe. You've always had a gift for taking care of people, a pediatric nurse." That was Tamrin's dream. She wanted to be the person, who made scared children feel safe, who held their hands during shots and made them laugh through their tears. She was a girl who believed in fairy tales, not because she was naive, but because she had witnessed them. Her grandparents proved that lasting love existed. Her mother proved that sacrifice could be an act of devotion rather than resentment. Tamrin believed the world was full of good people, good intentions, and good outcomes for those who worked hard and loved harder. She believed this right up until the moment she met Dalton Mercer. It was her junior year at Howard University when their paths crossed in the library. She was studying for a biology exam. Textbooks spread across the table like a paper fortress. He approached with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, already pulling out the chair. Tamrin looked up, ready to say yes, the seat was taken, but the words died in her throat. He was handsome, in a way that felt almost unfair. Sandy brown hair that fell perfectly across his forehead, pale green eyes that seemed to catch the light, a smile that made her forget what she'd been studying. "It's yours now," she heard herself say. "Dalton Mercer." He extended his hand. "Business major, Connecticut." "And you are?" "Tamrin Oaks, pre-nursing, Baltimore." "Baltimore," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "I knew there was something different about you." She laughed, trying to return her attention to her textbook. "Different how? You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." The line was bold, presumptuous even, but the way he said it, with absolute sincerity, no trace of performance, made her cheeks warm. "You don't even know me," she countered, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "Then let me fix that." He leaned forward, completely ignoring his own unopened books. "Tell me everything. I want to know every single thing about you." Most men would have said that and then dominated the conversation. Dalton didn't. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He wanted to know about her childhood, her dreams, her favorite memories. He remembered details, the way she took her coffee, the fact that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that her grandmother's sweet potato pie was the taste of home. They talked until the library closed. They talked through the next day and the day after that. Within 3 weeks, Dalton Mercer had become the center of Tamrin Oaks' world. "I'm going to marry you someday," he told her on their first official date, reaching across the table to take her hand. She laughed, but her heart raced. "You don't even know my middle name." "Rose," he said. "You told me the first night we met. Your grandmother's name. You're Tamrin Rose Oaks. You're going to change the world one sick child at a time, and I'm going to be right beside you when you do." How could she not fall in love with a man who listened like that? Who remembered like that? Who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked? They married 2 years after graduation. The ceremony was small, held at her grandmother's church in Baltimore, the same church where her grandparents had married nearly 50 years earlier. The wooden pews were worn smooth by generations of worshippers. Light filtered through stained glass windows, painting the aisle in shades of gold and crimson. Tamrin wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slender frame. The lace had yellowed slightly with age, but she thought it was perfect. Something old, something borrowed, something connecting her to the legacy of love she'd witnessed her entire life. When the doors opened and she began her walk down the aisle, she saw Dalton waiting at the altar. He was crying, not quiet tears, but full, unashamed sobs of joy. His best man had to steady him. The entire congregation murmured with approval. A man who loved this openly, this vulnerably, had to be a good man. Her mother squeezed her hand before releasing her. "He really loves you, baby," she whispered. "I can see it." Tamrin believed her. The first 3 years of marriage were everything she'd dreamed of. They bought a small townhouse in Silver Spring, Maryland, a modest place with good bones and terrible wallpaper. They spent weekends stripping walls and painting rooms in colors they chose together. Soft blues for the living room, warm yellows for the kitchen, sage green for the bedroom. They made love on paint-stained sheets and talked about the future like it was a gift they were unwrapping together. "I want at least 3 kids, Dalton said one Saturday afternoon, his arms wrapped around her waist as they stood in the empty room they'd designated as the future nursery. Maybe 4. A whole houseful of little Tamrins running around. She leaned back into his embrace, laughing. "Let's start with 1 and see how we survive. We'll be great parents," he murmured against her neck. "You'll be an amazing mother. You'll be an amazing father," she replied. They stood there in that empty room, wrapped in each other and their dreams, believing that this was only the beginning, that the best was yet to come. They had no idea that the foundation beneath them was already beginning to crack. Because love, Tamrin would eventually learn, could be a beautiful disguise for something else entirely. Something that looked like devotion but felt like ownership. Something that promised forever but delivered captivity. But that knowledge was still years away. For now, in that empty nursery, with her husband's arms around her and their future, stretching bright and endless before them, Tamrin Oakes Mercer was happy. Completely, blissfully, dangerously happy. The change didn't announce itself with trumpets or warning signs. It arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first degree of temperature change when you're boiling alive. Year 4 of their marriage brought Dalton's promotion to senior consultant at his firm. The title came with a significant raise, longer hours, and a level of stress he'd never experienced before. Tamrin understood. She was supportive. When he came home late, she kept his dinner warm. When he was irritable, she gave him space. But somewhere in those late nights and mounting pressures, something shifted. The first crack appeared on a Thursday evening. Tamrin had dressed for a dinner with his colleagues, an important evening he'd stressed. She wore a crimson wrap dress that she'd always loved, one that made her feel confident and beautiful. Dalton's eyes swept over her as she emerged from the bedroom, and his expression wasn't admiration. It was something colder. "You're wearing that?" he asked. The question landed like a slap. "What's wrong with it?" "It's just a bit much, don't you think? We're having dinner with my boss, Tamrin, not going to a nightclub." She looked down at the dress. It was elegant, appropriate, but doubt crept in like smoke under a door. "I can change. Please do. Something more understated. You want them to take us seriously, don't you?" She changed into something beige and forgettable, something that made her feel like wallpaper. At dinner, when she offered an opinion on a current event, Dalton laughed and patted her hand. "Did you really think that was a good idea to bring up politics at the table?" His colleagues laughed along, and Tamrin felt herself shrinking. On the drive home, she tried to address it. "You embarrassed me tonight. I was trying to help you," he countered. "You don't understand the dynamics of these business relationships. I make the money in this house. I think I know a little more about how the world works." The statement was absurd. She worked too, had her own career as a nurse, but she was tired, and fighting seemed exhausting, so she let it go. That was her first mistake. Because Dalton had learned something crucial that night, she would bend. Year 5 brought more bending, more adjusting, more of Tamrin reshaping herself to fit the mold Dalton seemed to require. Her bright colors disappeared from her closet, replaced by neutrals and blacks. "You look more professional in darker tones," he'd say. "More mature." Her friends started to feel the distance. Maya, her college roommate, called less frequently. "You're never available anymore," she said during one rare phone call. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Tamrin lied. "Just busy." The truth was, Dalton had opinions about her friends. Maya was too loud. Jessica was a bad influence. Carmen didn't understand what it meant to be in a serious marriage. "I'm not saying you can't see them," he would say. "I'm just saying I worry about you. They're still living like they're in college, and you've grown beyond that. I don't want them pulling you backward." It sounded like concern. It felt like a cage. Year 6 brought the cruelest cut of all. Tamrin had been applying to positions in pediatric nursing, her lifelong dream. She'd been offered an interview at Johns Hopkins, one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. She was thrilled, terrified, hopeful. Dalton's response was measured. "That's great, honey. But have you thought about the commute? The hours? We're trying to start a family." How will that work with you exhausted all the time? We've been trying to start a family for 2 years, she countered. It hasn't happened yet. I can't just put my career on hold indefinitely. His expression hardened. So, our family is on hold? That's what you're saying? That's not what There's an opening at my company's clinic, he interrupted. Corporate health services, great benefits, reasonable hours. And I'd be right there. We could even have lunch together most days. But it's not pediatrics. It's not what Tamrin. He took her hands, his voice softening into something that resembled tenderness. I just want to take care of you. Is that so wrong? I want to make sure you're safe, that you're not overworking yourself. It's not control, it's protection. I just love you so much that I can't stand the thought of losing you. The words should have sounded romantic. Instead, they felt like chains wrapped in velvet. But she was tired of fighting, tired of defending her dreams against someone who claimed to love her. She took the job at his company's clinic. She never went to the Johns Hopkins interview. By year 7, Tamrin barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She stood there one morning, studying her reflection like it belonged to a stranger. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, practical bun, no more natural curls framing her face. Her clothes were muted, conservative. Her posture had changed. She made herself smaller, took up less space. When had she stopped wearing jewelry? When had she stopped laughing at her own jokes? When had she started asking permission for things that should have required none? She had no friends left. They'd all drifted away or been carefully pruned from her life. She had no hobbies outside of what Dalton approved. She had no dreams that didn't somehow center around making him happy, making him proud, making him stay. The pediatric nursing dream, the one her grandmother had prayed over, the one her mother had sacrificed for, was gone, abandoned in a corporate clinic where she checked blood pressure and administered flu shots to employees who barely looked up from their phones. She had become a shadow, an echo, a faded photocopy of the vibrant woman she'd once been. Maybe he's right, she would think in her darkest moments. Maybe I am too much, too loud, too ambitious, too everything. Maybe this is what love requires: sacrifice, compromise, becoming less so that we can be more together. The thoughts weren't hers. They were his, planted so carefully over so many years that she could no longer tell where his voice ended and hers began. Now, some of you watching might be thinking, why didn't she just leave? It's a fair question. From the outside, the answer seems obvious. But here's what most people don't understand about this kind of relationship. It doesn't trap you overnight. It doesn't announce itself as abuse. It arrives as love, as care, as concern. Think about the metaphor of a frog in boiling water. If you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, it will immediately jump out. But if you place it in cool water and gradually increase the temperature, the frog doesn't notice the danger until it's too late. Tamrin didn't wake up one morning married to a man who controlled every aspect of her life. She woke up married to a man who said he loved her, who cried at their wedding, who just wanted to protect her, to keep her safe, to make sure she wasn't making mistakes. Each restriction came wrapped in concern. Each criticism came disguised as helpful feedback. Each loss of freedom was presented as a gain in security. And by the time she realized she was drowning, she'd forgotten how to swim. If you're watching this and something feels familiar, if you've found yourself making excuses for someone's behavior, if you've started believing that you're the problem, if you've lost touch with the person you used to be, please hear this. Abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises. Sometimes it leaves fingerprints on your soul that take years to wash away. But here's the thing about prisons: no matter how carefully they're constructed, eventually every lock reveals its weakness. Every wall shows its cracks. And for Tamrin, that crack was about to appear on a Thursday evening in October, in the form of a text message that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage. It was a Thursday evening in October when Tamrin's world ended, not with an explosion or a dramatic revelation, but with a simple buzzing sound on a nightstand, the kind of ordinary moment that divides your life into before and after 7 years of marriage. 7 years of compromise and silence and slow erasure. 7 years of believing that if she could just be better, quieter, smaller, everything would be okay. All of it came crashing down because of 14 words on a glowing screen. Dalton was in the shower. Tamrin could hear the water running, could hear him humming something she didn't recognize. She was sitting on their bed, scrolling through her own phone, when his buzzed on the nightstand beside her. The glance was automatic, innocent, the kind of thing you do when you've been married for years and there are no secrets between you. Except there were secrets. The message preview lit up the screen. Marcus, work. I miss you already. Last night was incredible. When are you leaving her? Time stopped. Tamrin's brain struggled to process the words. Marcus was Dalton's colleague. They'd had dinner together just last month. Marcus and his wife Dalton and Tamrin. She remembered laughing at his jokes, complimenting his wife's earrings. But the name was a lie, a cover, because the words that followed weren't professional. They weren't friendly. They were intimate. Her hands trembled as she picked up his phone. No passcode. He'd never needed one, he'd said. We don't keep secrets from each other, do we? She unlocked it. What she found shattered her. Weeks of messages. Months, maybe. Conversations that painted a picture she couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't turn away from. A woman named Angela. Someone from his office. Someone younger. Someone who didn't ask questions or have needs or expect him to keep promises. The messages were detailed. Explicit. Planning meetups, while Tamrin worked late shifts at the clinic. Conversations about weekend getaways that he'd told Tamrin were business trips. She doesn't understand me the way you do. I'm working on an exit strategy. Just need to time it right. Last night with you reminded me what it feels like to be wanted. There were photographs. Not all of them explicit, but enough. Angela at a restaurant Tamrin recognized. The one Dalton had said was overrated when she'd suggested they try it for their anniversary. Angela wearing a necklace Tamrin had never seen but recognized the credit card charge for. Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might tear itself apart. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. The room tilted, and she had to focus on breathing. In, out, in, out. The shower shut off. Tamrin sat on the edge of their bed, the bed they'd picked out together, the bed where he'd promised to love her forever, and waited. Dalton emerged from the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist, water still dripping from his hair. He was smiling, relaxed, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had just crumbled. He saw her face first. Then, his phone clutched in her hands. His expression shifted instantly, not to guilt but to defensiveness. What are you doing? The words came out sharp, accusatory. Not I can explain. Not, I'm sorry. But what are you doing? As if she were the one violating trust. Tamrin's voice came out barely above a whisper. Who is she, Dalton? Who is this woman? He stood frozen for a moment, calculating. She could see him working through options, testing out explanations, searching for the right combination of words that would make this her fault. You went through my phone? He finally said. Answer the question. You invaded my privacy, Tamrin. Do you understand how messed up that is? She stood up, legs shaking but finding strength from somewhere deep inside. You're having an affair. You've been having an affair for months. And you're angry at me for finding out? It's not what you think. Then what is it? She held up the phone, scrolling to a particularly damning exchange. What am I supposed to think when she's asking when you're leaving me? When you're telling her that I don't understand you? Dalton's jaw tightened. He moved toward her, and she instinctively stepped back. Don't, she said. He stopped, and something flickered across his face. Not remorse. Something colder. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I've been seeing someone else. And you want to know why? Here it comes, she thought. The blame. The twist. The way he makes this about my failures. Because you've become impossible to live with, Tamrin. You're needy. You're insecure. You're always questioning me. Always doubting. Always making me feel like I'm not enough. The words were so absurd, they would have been laughable if they hadn't been devastating. I question you because you lie, she said. I doubt you because you're untrustworthy. See, this right here, This is exactly what I'm talking about. He was warming up now, building momentum. I work 60-hour weeks to provide for us. I come home exhausted, and what do I get? Suspicion, attitude. You've let yourself go. You don't take care of yourself like you used to. You don't make an effort anymore. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. When's the last time you dressed up for me? When's the last time you were actually interested in my day? You're so wrapped up in your own little world that you don't even see how much I sacrifice. I gave up everything for you, Tamrin heard herself say. My friends, my career, my dreams. I became exactly what you said you wanted, and it still wasn't enough. Because you did it with resentment, he shot back. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't feel you pulling away? I pulled away because you were suffocating me. I was loving you. His voice rose, filling their bedroom with fury. I was trying to protect you, to build a life with you, and you threw it back in my face with your constant neediness. You cheated on me, Dalton. You don't get to make this my fault. If you were better, if you were the wife I needed, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. There it was, the core of his argument laid bare. If she were different, better, less, more, anything other than what she was, he wouldn't have destroyed their marriage. The sad part was that a version of Tamrin from 6 months ago might have believed him, might have apologized, might have begged for another chance to be whatever he needed. But something had changed. Standing there in their bedroom, holding evidence of his betrayal while he yelled about her shortcomings, something inside Tamrin finally broke. Not in the way that destroys, in the way that sets free. For the first time in 7 years, she saw her husband clearly. Not through the filter of who she wanted him to be, or who he'd pretended to be in the beginning. She saw him as he actually was. Not the charming young man who had cried at their wedding. Not the devoted husband who said he only wanted to protect her, but a manipulative stranger who had spent 7 years systematically stealing her sense of self, brick by brick, until she barely existed outside of his approval. The fog lifted. The prison walls became visible. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Tamrin saw the door. I want a divorce, she said quietly. Dalton laughed. Actually laughed. You're not serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. You're overreacting. You're emotional. Tomorrow you'll calm down and we can talk about this rationally. There's nothing to talk about. I'm filing for divorce. Tamrin, get out of this room, sleep on the couch, and tomorrow find yourself a lawyer. She walked past him into the bathroom and locked the door. Her whole body was shaking, but beneath the fear and devastation was something new. Relief. She filed for divorce the following Monday. No more discussions, no more chances, no dramatic speeches or attempts to make him understand. Just action. Clean, final, necessary. If Tamrin thought the affair was painful, the divorce was war. Dalton contested everything. Every asset, every piece of furniture, every shared memory became a battlefield. He dragged out proceedings for 4 months, made everything as painful and expensive as possible. His lawyer painted Tamrin as unstable, ungrateful, a woman throwing away a perfectly good marriage over one small mistake. One small mistake. As if 7 years of emotional manipulation could be erased by minimizing his infidelity, he accused her of abandonment, despite the fact that he was the one who had been planning to leave. He accused her of taking advantage of his generosity, despite her having worked throughout their entire marriage. He rewrote their history in depositions and court filings, transforming himself into the long-suffering husband and her into the unreasonable wife. But something fundamental had changed in Tamrin. She didn't crumble under his attacks. She didn't second-guess herself when his lawyer tried to twist her words. She didn't apologize for wanting freedom. For the first time in years, she was fighting for herself. Her lawyer was a sharp woman named Patricia who had heard every story and believed none of the performances. He's going to try to break you down, Patricia warned. That's what men like him do. They can't stand losing control. He already lost control, Tamrin said. He just doesn't know it yet. The divorce was finalized on a cold February morning. No dramatic courtroom scenes. Just signatures on papers that dissolved 7 years of marriage in the time it took to sign her name. Tamrin Oakes. Not Tamrin Mercer, just Oakes. She walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than she had in years. Her college roommate Maya lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. They'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, or as much as they could, after Dalton had made it clear he didn't approve of Tamrin's party friends. When Tamrin called and asked if she could stay for a few weeks while she figured things out, Maya didn't ask questions. "Come home," she said simply. "I've got a spare room with your name on it." Charlotte was 400 miles from Silver Spring. 400 miles from the townhouse she'd painted with dreams that turned to ash. 400 miles from the man who had tried to convince her she was nothing without him. It felt like crossing into another country, another life. Within 2 weeks, Tamrin had secured a position at Presbyterian Hospital in the pediatric wing. The pediatric wing, the dream Dalton had convinced her to abandon. The career path he'd said was impractical, exhausting, incompatible with their life together. The irony wasn't lost on her. The first thing she did as a free woman was resurrect the dream he'd killed. Her first day at the hospital, walking through the bright hallways decorated with cartoon animals and hand-painted murals, Tamrin felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The physical transformation came gradually, then all at once. She started with her hair. The tight, practical bun Dalton had preferred was gone. She walked into a salon and told the stylist, "Cut it. Make it bold." She left with a short, natural cut that framed her face and made her look younger, freer. When she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, she barely recognized herself. That was the point. The bright colors returned next. The yellows and reds and deep purples that Dalton had called too loud now filled her closet. She wore them like armor, like declarations of independence. She stood in front of her mirror one morning, 6 months after the divorce, and actually smiled at her reflection. There she was, not the shadow she'd become, not the woman who apologized for existing, but Tamrin, the girl who had dreamed of healing children, the woman who had survived and was learning to thrive. Small victories accumulated, ordering food at restaurants without checking if her choice was appropriate, making plans without seeking permission, buying things she wanted without justifying the expense to anyone but herself. The joy of autonomy was intoxicating. She'd forgotten what it felt like to make decisions based on her own desires rather than someone else's approval. 6 months after her divorce, Tamrin was stable, growing, healing. She wasn't looking for love. She was focused on herself, on rebuilding the foundation Dalton had tried to destroy. She was learning something crucial. Being alone was not the same as being lonely. But healing, she discovered, wasn't a straight line. She started therapy. A kind woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in trauma and emotional abuse. In that quiet office, Tamrin began to unpack years of manipulation, to understand that what she'd experienced had a name: coercive control, emotional abuse, gaslighting. It wasn't your fault, Dr. Chen would remind her during sessions when Tamrin spiraled into self-blame. You didn't cause his behavior. You couldn't have prevented it. And you certainly didn't deserve it. Some days, Tamrin believed her. Other days, Dalton's voice still echoed in her head, telling her she was too much, not enough, fundamentally flawed. Healing wasn't linear. Some days were good, full of hope and progress. Other days, she found herself crying in her car for reasons she couldn't articulate. But she was moving forward. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but forward nonetheless. She was becoming whole. Now, I need to pause here for a moment. Because if you've been watching this story and something about Tamrin's journey feels familiar, if you've recognized yourself in her struggles, in her silence, in the way she lost herself trying to love someone who didn't deserve her, I see you. I hear you. And I want you to know something. What happened to Tamrin wasn't her fault. And whatever happened to you wasn't yours either. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had a moment where everything suddenly became clear? Where the fog lifted and you finally saw the truth? Maybe it was a text message, like Tamrin. Maybe it was something someone said. Maybe it was just waking up one morning and realizing you couldn't do it anymore. Drop a comment below and share your moment. I read every single one, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story is hitting different for you, if it's touching something real, hit that like button. Let me know I'm not just talking to myself here. Let me know this matters. Because what happens next? The woman who lost herself is about to collide with a love she never saw coming. A love that looks nothing like what she escaped. A love that heals instead of harms. And trust me, nobody, not Tamrin, not Dalton, not even the universe itself, could have predicted where this story goes from here. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Hit that bell notification, because you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Let's continue. 6 months after her divorce, Tamrin Oakes was finally learning to breathe again. She had settled into a rhythm in Charlotte, work at Presbyterian Hospital, therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, quiet evenings in her small apartment reading novels she'd forgotten she loved. Life was simple, peaceful, predictable. She liked predictable. Which is why what happened on that Tuesday morning in April caught her completely off guard. She was running late for her shift, which wasn't unusual. The pediatric ward started early, and Tamrin had never been a morning person. Coffee in one hand, bag slung over her shoulder, mind already racing through the day's responsibilities, medication rounds, chart updates, the new patient arriving from the ICU. The hospital lobby was alive with its usual morning chaos. Doctors rushing between floors, families clutching visitor badges, the steady hum of conversations and footsteps echoing off polished floors. Tamrin navigated through it all with practiced efficiency, eyes focused on the elevator bank ahead. She wasn't watching where she was going, which is how she collided, full force, with a man carrying what appeared to be architectural blueprints. The impact was total. Her coffee exploded like a small bomb, sending hot liquid across both of them. Her bag flew from her shoulder, scattering its contents across the floor. The blueprints scattered like oversized confetti. "Oh my God," she gasped, looking up in horror, and froze. The man standing before her was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair threaded with premature silver at the temples. His eyes were the most striking shade of pale blue she'd ever seen, like a winter sky just before snow. He wore a crisp, white button-down shirt that was now decorated with coffee stains, and his expression was shifting from surprise to something that looked remarkably like amusement. "Well," he said, looking down at his ruined shirt, "I've had warmer welcomes to my day." His voice was warm, rich with the hint of laughter. No anger, no irritation, no sharp words about her clumsiness. Just amusement. Tamrin scrambled into action, frantically digging through her bag for napkins that she was almost certain she didn't have. "I am so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going, and I'm late for my shift, and I can't believe It's fine," he interrupted gently, his voice cutting through her rambling panic. "Really, it's fine. I have a spare shirt in my office." She paused in her frantic searching. "Your office? You work here?" His smile was slow and genuine, creating small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Something like that. Before Tamrin could process what that meant, he was extending his hand. "I'm Brennan Holt. I run the Holt Medical Foundation. We're partnering with the hospital on a new children's wing." The words hit her like cold water. The Holt Medical Foundation. She knew that name. Everyone in healthcare knew that name. One of the largest medical philanthropies in the Southeast, focused on pediatric care and research. And Brennan Holt, she was looking at the billionaire CEO who had founded the organization after his younger sister died of childhood leukemia, the man who had turned personal tragedy into purpose, who had donated hundreds of millions of dollars to children's hospitals across the country, the man whose white shirt now looked like a coffee shop crime scene. "I just poured coffee on a billionaire," she muttered, barely audible. Brennan's laugh was genuine and unexpected, echoing through the lobby and drawing glances from passers-by. "You poured coffee on a man who desperately needed an excuse to skip a boring meeting with the board of directors. You may have actually saved my life, Miss Oakes," she managed. Tamrin Oakes, pediatric nurse, professional coffee destroyer, apparently. Well, Tamrin Oakes, professional coffee destroyer, he said, his handshake firm and warm, lasting. Perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. It's genuinely a pleasure to meet you. Something electric passed between them in that moment. Something that made her acutely aware of his hand holding hers, of the way. He was looking at her like she was interesting rather than catastrophic. Something she immediately dismissed as embarrassment. "I should go," she said quickly, releasing his hand and gathering her scattered belongings with renewed urgency. Again, "I'm so sorry about your shirt. And the blueprints. And probably your mourning. Don't worry about any of it," he said, already kneeling to help collect the scattered papers. These things happen. As Tamrin hurried away toward the elevators, she didn't see Brennan Holt, watching her retreat with an expression of unmistakable interest. She didn't see him smile to himself as he gathered the coffee-stained blueprints. And she certainly didn't see him make a mental note to find more reasons to visit the pediatric wing. Over the following weeks, Brennan Holt became a surprisingly regular presence in the pediatric ward. Just overseeing the new construction, he would explain to anyone who asked, gesturing vaguely toward the wing that was still months away from breaking ground. Meeting with department heads to understand the daily operations, he would say, though. The meetings seemed to last precisely long enough to walk past Tamrin's station. Ensuring the Foundation's vision aligns with the hospital's needs was another favorite, delivered with complete seriousness despite the fact that his ensuring seemed to involve a lot of casual conversations about patient care and very little actual foundational business. The nurses noticed. They whispered among themselves and exchanged knowing looks when the handsome billionaire found yet another reason to tour their floor. "He's here for you," her colleague Janet said one afternoon, watching Brennan disappear. Around the corner, after what had been described as quality assessment observations. "He's here for work," Tamrin replied, not looking up from the chart she was updating. "Honey, that man has been working on this floor every day for 2 weeks. Either he's the most hands-on CEO in history, or he's got other motivations." Tamrin did look up then, catching Brennan's eye as he paused at the nurse's station. He raised an eyebrow, and she could swear she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "Purely coincidental," she called out, loud enough for him to hear. His grin was unrepentant. Purely coincidental. It was anything but coincidental, and they both knew it. Despite Janet's observations and Brennan's obvious interest, Tamrin kept her walls firmly in place. She had just escaped one relationship. The last thing she needed was another, especially with a man whose world was so completely different from her own. What did she have in common with a billionaire philanthropist? What could someone like her offer someone like him? The questions ran on loop in her mind every time he appeared. Her internal dialogue had become a constant warning system. Don't get attached. Don't read into kindness. Don't mistake interest for anything more than curiosity. You just learned how to be alone. Don't give that up for another man who might decide you're not enough. The walls she had built around herself weren't just for protection. They were survival architecture, constructed carefully over months of therapy and healing. She wasn't ready to tear them down for anyone, no matter how blue their eyes or how genuine their laugh. But Brennan didn't seem interested in tearing down walls. Instead, he was patient in a way that was completely foreign to Tamrin's experience. He didn't push. He didn't pressure. He didn't demand explanations for her carefully maintained distance or try to rush past her boundaries. He simply showed up, consistently, reliably, genuinely. The contrast to Dalton's courtship was stark. Dalton had been overwhelming from the beginning, intense, consuming, demanding complete attention and immediate commitment. He had pursued her like a campaign, with strategy and overwhelming force. Brennan was different. He was present without being invasive, interested without being aggressive. He seemed content to exist in her orbit, without demanding to be the center of it. The difference became clear during what Tamrin would later think of as the sweet potato pie incident. They had been talking during one of his random visits to the pediatric wing, a casual conversation about comfort foods and childhood memories. Tamrin mentioned, almost offhandedly, How much she missed her grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe. "I've tried to recreate it a dozen times," she said, checking the 4 on one of her young patients. "But it's never quite right. I think she must have had some secret ingredient she never wrote down. Food made with love always tastes different," Brennan agreed. "There's some element you can't replicate." It was a nothing conversation, the kind of small talk that fills the spaces between more important things. Tamrin thought nothing more of it. 3 days later, she arrived home from work to find a grocery bag sitting outside her apartment door. Inside, sweet potatoes, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla extract, eggs, evaporated milk, everything needed for sweet potato pie. The note tucked between the ingredients was written in elegant handwriting, "My cooking. Skills are limited to cereal and sandwiches, but I'd love to taste yours someday. No pressure, just a thought. No pressure, no expectation, no demand for gratitude or reciprocation. Just thoughtfulness." Tamrin stood in her kitchen that evening, holding the note and feeling something crack open in her chest. When was the last time someone had listened to her so carefully that they remembered a throwaway comment about pie? When was the last time someone had acted on that memory without asking for anything in return? She baked the pie that weekend. It still wasn't quite like her grandmother's, but it was close enough. She didn't know it yet, but Brennan was learning something important about her. Tamrin Oakes was someone worth paying attention to, worth remembering, worth the kind of quiet care that asked for nothing back. The walls began to crack on the worst day of Tamrin's career. His name was Sam, and he was 7 years old. He'd been fighting leukemia for 2 years with a kind of courage that humbled everyone who met him. Bright eyes, infectious laugh, an endless stream of questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether superheroes ever got tired of saving people. Tamrin had been his primary nurse for 3 months. She'd watched him endure treatments that would break most adults. She'd celebrated with him when his counts improved and held his hand through the setbacks. She'd helped him write letters to his favorite baseball player and taught him card tricks during the long hours of chemotherapy. She thought he was winning. Tuesday afternoon, his condition changed rapidly. Within hours, the boy who had been telling jokes and planning what he wanted for his 8th birthday was gone. Tamrin held his mother while she sobbed. She helped the family gather his belongings, the stuffed dinosaur that had been his constant companion, the drawings he'd made for all the nurses, the baseball cap signed by his favorite player. She held herself together through the end of her shift, through the documentation and the conversations with other staff members. She even managed to drive home without falling apart. But when she reached the parking lot of her apartment complex, she broke. 7 years old. He'd been 7 years old. She sat in her car and wept for the unfairness of it all, for the family whose world had just ended, for the little boy who would never get to blow out 8 birthday candles. She didn't notice the figure approaching her car until there was a gentle tap on her window. Brennan stood outside, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate, his expression soft with concern. "I heard about today," he said when she rolled down the window. "I'm so sorry." She wasn't even surprised to see him there. Later, she would wonder how he'd known where to find her, how he'd known what she needed. In the moment, it felt natural that he would appear when she was breaking apart. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How do you love these kids knowing you might lose them?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment, then handed her one of the cups. The chocolate was perfect, not too sweet, still warm. "You don't stop loving them," he said finally. "You love them harder because the time is precious. You love them because that love matters, even when, especially when, it hurts." He didn't try to fix her pain. He didn't offer empty platitudes about everything happening for a reason or Sam being in a better place. He didn't rush to make her feel better. He just said, "I'm here if you need to talk, or if you need silence." "Whatever you need," Tamrin cried. He stayed. He didn't flinch from her grief, didn't try to talk her out of it, didn't make it about his discomfort with her tears. He just held space for her pain until she was ready to carry it herself again. That night, driving home after sitting in that parking lot for an hour, Tamrin felt something fundamental shift. Something in her carefully constructed walls began to crack. Not because he had tried to tear them down, but because he had shown her what it looked like when someone honored them. The final crack came weeks later, during another one of their casual conversations. They were in the family lounge of the pediatric ward, a quiet space designed for parents who needed a moment away from their child's bedside. Tamrin was taking a break. Brennan was ostensibly reviewing plans for the new wing. "I'm too broken for love, Brennan," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've got cracks running through me that might never heal." She expected him to leave then, to finally see what Dalton had always told her she was: damaged goods, too much work, not worth the effort. Instead, Brennan looked at her with those winter sky eyes and said something that changed everything. The Japanese have an art form called kintsugi. They repair broken pottery with gold. They don't try to hide the breaks or pretend they never happened. They highlight them because they believe the breaks make the piece more beautiful, not less, more valuable, not less. His hand reached for hers, and she didn't pull away. "Your cracks, Tamrin, they don't make you broken. They just show me how strong you've had to be. They're not flaws, they're proof of survival, and if you'll let me, I'd like to learn every single one of them." 6 months after the coffee incident, 8 months after her divorce, Tamrin Oakes finally agreed to a real date. Not because her walls had been torn down, but because she had met someone willing to build doors. Their first date was at a small restaurant overlooking Lake Norman. Brennan had made reservations at one of those intimate places where the tables were spaced far enough apart that conversations felt private. Candles flickered on white tablecloths, and soft jazz played from speakers hidden somewhere in the exposed brick walls. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the lake stretched out like dark glass, reflecting the lights of distant homes on the opposite shore. Tamrin wore a dress the color of sunset, deep orange fading to pink, the kind of bold choice she never would have made during her marriage to Dalton, the kind of color that made her feel alive. When Brennan saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her glad she'd chosen it. "You look incredible," he said, and there was no performance in the words. Just truth. They ordered wine they barely touched, and food they forgot to eat, because the conversation consumed everything else. They talked about childhood memories and favorite books, about places they'd traveled and places they wanted to go, about the small things that make a life, morning routines and comfort, foods and the songs that could transport you back to specific moments. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the conversation turned serious. "Tell me about your sister," Tamrin said gently. "You mentioned her before, but I'd like to know more. If you're comfortable sharing." Brennan was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the stem of his wine glass. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Her name was Elise. She was 4 years younger than me, which made her the most annoying and most important person in my life." A sad smile crossed his face. "She was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 12. I was 16. He described watching his baby sister go through treatments that would break most adults. The way her hair fell out in clumps, but she insisted on picking out the most outrageous wigs she could find. How she made the doctors and nurses laugh, even when she was in pain. She had more courage in her 12-year-old body than I've ever had in my entire life," Brennan said, his eyes glistening. "She used to tell the other kids in the cancer ward that they were superheroes, that the treatments were giving them powers. She made up elaborate backstories for each of them." "She sounds remarkable," Tamrin whispered. She really was." He took a breath. "Before she died, she made me promise something. She said, 'Brennan, you have to do something that matters. Don't just make money. Don't just exist. Do something that would make me proud.' She was 14 when she passed, and I was so angry. At God, at the universe, at every doctor who couldn't save her. I was angry for a long time." His hand found Tamrin's across the table. "But eventually, I realized that staying angry was betraying her memory. Elise didn't waste her time being angry. She loved people. She made them laugh. She tried to make the world less scary for the kids fighting the same battle she was." "The Holt Medical Foundation," Tamrin said, understanding dawning. "Her legacy. My promise kept Brennan's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Every child who gets treatment because of the foundation's funding, every family who doesn't have to choose between medical care and bankruptcy, that's Elise. That's her impact continuing. Tamrin felt tears building behind her eyes. She would be so proud of you. I hope so. And I think... He paused, looking directly at her. I think she would have loved you. She always appreciated people who spoke their minds, who didn't try to make themselves smaller to fit into someone else's expectations. The words landed with weight. He knew. Not the details, maybe, but he understood that she had spent years making herself smaller. She sounds like someone I would have loved to meet, Tamrin said, squeezing his hand. They sat there in that moment, connected by shared grief and hard-won healing, until the waiter approached apologetically to inform them that the restaurant was closing. They had been talking for 4 hours. The staff had long since stacked chairs around them. Brennan walked her to her apartment door, and they stood there in the hallway, under the harsh overhead light that somehow still felt romantic. He looked at her like she was something precious, something rare and worth protecting. Can I see you again? He asked. I'd like that, she whispered. He leaned in slowly, and she watched his approach with her heart hammering against her ribs. He gave her every opportunity to pull away, to say no, to retreat behind her walls. She didn't. When their lips finally met, it was gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered all at once. His hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, and Tamrin felt warmth bloom in her chest, like a flower opening to sunlight. The kiss was nothing like the passionate, consuming kisses from her early relationship with Dalton. This was different. This was patient. This asked instead of demanded. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers for a long moment. Good night, Tamrin, he murmured. Good night, Brennan. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her fingers touching her lips, a smile spreading across her face. This, she thought. This is what love was supposed to feel like. The relationship that followed was everything Tamrin had never known she could have. They merged two completely different worlds, with surprising ease. Brennan took her to foundation galas and charity events where she wore those bright colors proudly and learned to navigate conversations with donors and board members. She discovered she was good at it, telling stories about the children she cared for, making the foundation's work tangible and real. But Brennan was equally comfortable in her world. He showed up at her small apartment with takeout from the Thai place down the street. They watched old movies on her worn couch, his arm around her shoulders, arguing good-naturedly about whether the original or the remake was better. He met her mother on a trip back to Baltimore. Tamrin had been nervous about the introduction, but her mother took one look at the way Brennan moved naturally into her kitchen and started washing dishes without being asked, and pulled her daughter aside. This one's different, baby, she whispered. I can tell. He's good people. I know, Mama, Tamrin replied, watching Brennan laugh at something her aunt had said. On the anniversary of her grandmother's passing, Brennan drove her to the cemetery without being asked. He stood quietly beside her while she knelt at the gravestone and whispered updates about her life. I found him, Grandma, she said softly, aware of Brennan standing a respectful distance away. The kind of love you prayed for, the kind you and Grandpa had. Brennan didn't rush her, didn't check his phone, didn't make her feel like her grief was an inconvenience. He just waited, patient and present. That was the pattern of their relationship. Respect, consistency, peace. 1 year together, and Tamrin felt more herself than she had in a decade. Then, everything changed. Tamrin sat on her bathroom floor, staring at the white plastic stick in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Clear, unmistakable, pregnant. Her heart raced, mind spinning through 1,000 thoughts at once. They hadn't planned this. They had been careful, well, mostly careful, but clearly not careful enough. They hadn't even discussed marriage beyond Brennan's occasional jokes about when we're old and grey together. What would he think? They'd only been together a year. Would this feel like a trap? Would he feel obligated to stay out of duty rather than choice? The questions came flooding in like water through a cracked dam, and with them came the voice she thought she'd finally silenced. Dalton's voice. You're too much. You're not enough. You'll drive him away with your needs, your demands, your existence. Stop, she whispered to herself. That's not true. That was never true. But the fear was real regardless. She had taken the pregnancy test only because her doctor had called that morning with results from routine blood work. Congratulations, the nurse had said cheerfully. You're pregnant, about 8 weeks along. We'll need to schedule an ultrasound. Wait, what? You didn't know? Oh, well, surprise. Tamrin had gone through the rest of the conversation in a daze, agreeing to appointments. She barely heard, her mind stuck on 3 words, you're pregnant. The nurse had mentioned something else too, something about unusual hormone levels, and wanting to check something, but Tamrin had been too shocked to process it fully. She'd been sitting on this bathroom floor for 30 minutes, trying to find the courage to tell Brennan when she heard his knock on the door. Tamrin, are you all right? You've been in there for 30 minutes. His voice was concerned but not demanding, worried but not angry. She opened the door and simply handed him the test, unable to find words. She watched his face carefully, cataloguing every micro-expression. Surprise registered first, his eyebrows rising, his eyes widening. Confusion followed, his head tilting slightly as he processed what he was seeing. Then something that looked remarkably like joy. Is this real? He breathed. The doctor called this morning. I didn't know. I suspected maybe, but I wasn't sure, and then she said... Tamrin took a deep breath, forcing herself to slow down. Brennan, it's not just one baby. What? They saw something unusual in my hormone levels. They did an ultrasound this afternoon. There are 3 heartbeats. Triplets. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Tamrin watched him process this information, watched his free hand come up to, run through his hair, watched him blink several times in rapid succession. She expected fear. She expected hesitation. She expected to see the moment he realized this was too much, too fast, too complicated. She expected the door to close. Instead, Brennan swept her into his arms. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped firmly around her waist. Triplets, he whispered against her hair, and she felt his chest shaking. For a terrifying moment, she thought he was crying from distress. Then she heard the laugh, pure, joyful, disbelieving. We're having triplets. Tamrin, this is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. She pulled back to look at his face, needing to see if he meant it. His eyes were wet with tears, but he was smiling. Actually smiling. You're not scared. Her voice came out muffled against his chest. He pulled back just enough to cradle her face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes. I'm terrified, he admitted with a laugh. I'm absolutely terrified. 3 babies, Tamrin. 3 tiny humans who are going to depend on us for everything. I don't know the first thing about being a father, let alone a father to triplets. But, he continued, I'm also the happiest I've ever been. This, you, them, this life we're building, this is everything I never knew I needed. He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. When he pulled back, his expression was serious, determined. Marry me. Tamrin's eyes went wide. What? I know this isn't how I planned to do this. I was going to wait. I had this whole elaborate plan. Ring, sunset, champagne, probably some embarrassingly romantic speech. He laughed. But I don't want to wait anymore. His hands were still cradling her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I want to build a life with you, Tamrin Oakes. I want to raise these children together. I want to be there for every midnight feeding and every first step. I want to grow old holding your hand and telling our grandchildren about the day their grandmother poured coffee all over me and changed my life forever. Marry me, not because of the babies, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you've shown me what it means to be strong and vulnerable at the same time. Because loving you is the easiest and best thing I've ever done. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands moving to wrap around her waist and lift her slightly off the ground. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Tamrin felt something she hadn't felt in years. Completely, utterly, safely loved. The pregnancy was classified as high risk from the beginning. Multiple births always carried additional complications, and triplets more so. There were weekly doctor's appointments that became twice weekly, then almost daily, monitoring and measurements, and careful watching for any sign that something might be going wrong. At 28 weeks, Tamrin was placed on strict bed rest. At 32 weeks, her doctor admitted her to Presbyterian Hospital for round-the-clock monitoring. "I know it's not ideal," Dr. Palmer said sympathetically, "but we want to get these babies as close to full term as possible. Every day they stay in there is a win." Brennan transformed her hospital room into a second office. He brought in a comfortable chair, set up his laptop on the small desk, and conducted board meetings via video conference with quiet apologies to whoever was on the other end. "Sorry, I'm at the hospital. No, everything's fine, just being cautious. Where were we?" He slept in the uncomfortable visitor's chair despite Tamrin's protests. "You need rest," she argued one evening, watching him try to find a comfortable position in the chair that was clearly not designed for sleeping. "You have a perfectly good bed at home. I need to be near you," he countered, finally giving up and just pulling the chair closer to her bed so he could hold her hand while he slept. She stopped arguing after that, because this was what partnership looked like. This was what she had been missing all those years with Dalton. Someone who showed up not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Someone who considered being near her a need rather than an obligation. The Foundation's work continued, but Brennan delegated more than he ever had before. His second-in-command took over the day-to-day operations. Board members started coming to the hospital for meetings, settling into the family lounge down the hall to discuss budgets and initiatives, while Brennan stayed close. Tamrin's mother visited from Baltimore, staying for a week to keep her daughter company and to, as she put it, make sure this man is taking care of my baby. She left satisfied. "He's a keeper," she told Tamrin. "Don't you let this one go." "I don't plan to, Mama." At 34 weeks, 2 days, and 7 hours into her hospital stay, Tamrin woke at 3 in the morning with the first contraction. The delivery room was controlled chaos. Dr. Palmer and her team moved with practiced efficiency. 2 nurses for each baby, plus the attending physician, plus the anesthesiologist, plus what felt like a dozen other people Tamrin couldn't identify through the pain and fear. Brennan stood beside her, holding her hand, his forehead pressed against hers. "You're doing amazing," he whispered between contractions. "I'm so proud of you. Our babies are almost here. You're so strong. Just a little longer." The words were a lifeline. She focused on his voice, on the pressure of his hand in hers, on the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. Hours of labor, pain that made her understand why they called it labor. This was work, hard and exhausting and relentless. Then, the first cry pierced the air. Sharp, indignant, absolutely beautiful. "It's a girl, Doctor," Palmer announced. The second cry followed moments later, this one even louder. Another girl. And finally, the third, a boy whose lungs proved to be just as powerful as his sister's. And a boy. "Congratulations. You have 2 daughters and a son. Perfect, healthy, screaming with the full force of new life." Brennan wept openly, unashamed, as the nurses cleaned and wrapped each baby. They placed them in his arms one by one, 3 tiny bundles, each weighing just over 4 pounds, each absolutely perfect. "They're beautiful," he whispered, looking from one baby to the next in wonder. "They're so beautiful." Tamrin, exhausted but radiant, watched the man she loved become a father. His face was transformed with awe and love and terror and joy all mixed together. The nurses placed the babies in 3 bassinets lined up beside her bed, 2 pink blankets and 1 blue. They looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile, impossibly precious. This was everything they had worked toward, everything they had healed toward, the life they had chosen to build together from the broken pieces of their pasts. The delivery room gradually emptied as the immediate crisis of birth gave way to the quiet work of recovery. Dr. Palmer finished her checks. The extra nurses filed out. The equipment was wheeled away. Quiet settled over the room like a blanket. Brennan sat in the chair beside her bed, one hand holding hers, his eyes moving between her face and the 3 sleeping babies. "We did it," Tamrin whispered. "You did it," he corrected, kissing her forehead. "You're incredible." For one perfect moment, the world was exactly as it should be. A new family, whole and healthy and together. The beginning of their forever. Then, the door slammed open with enough force to crack the wall. And standing in the doorway, chest heaving with 7 years of rage, was the man Tamrin had escaped. The man who was never supposed to find her. Dalton Mercer had arrived. Dalton Mercer stood in the doorway like an avenging ghost. His face was contorted with rage, the kind of fury that had been building for months, feeding on resentment and wounded pride. His eyes, which had once seemed so charming, so full of false promises, were now wild with something dangerous. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, sticking up at odd angles like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. His expensive suit, the kind he used to wear to impress clients and assert dominance, was wrinkled and rumpled, as if he'd been traveling for a long time without rest. Because he had been. There you are. 2 words, simple, devastating, possessive in a way that made Tamrin's blood run cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The peace that had settled over them just moments before shattered like glass hitting concrete. Tamrin felt old fear rising in her chest, climbing her throat like bile. Her body remembered what her mind had been trying to forget. The sound of his voice when he was angry, the way he could fill a room with his presence and make her feel small. "Dalton?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" His laugh was bitter, ugly, nothing like the charming sound he'd used during their courtship. "What am I doing here?" He took a step into the room, and Tamrin instinctively pressed back against her hospital bed. "I've been looking for you for months, Tamrin. Months. Do you have any idea how hard you are to find when you decide to disappear? You think you can just vanish, change your number, move across the country without telling me?" His words dripped with entitlement, as if her freedom was a personal offense against him. "As if I wouldn't find you eventually." Tamrin forced strength into her voice, though her hands were shaking. "We're divorced, Dalton. You have no right to look for me. You have no right to be here. We were married for 7 years. His voice rose, filling the small hospital room with fury. 7 years, Tamrin. You don't just throw that away. You don't just walk away from... He stopped. His gaze had landed on the 3 bassinets lined up beside Tamrin's bed. 3 tiny bundles wrapped in hospital blankets, 2 pink, 1 blue. 3 babies who had been sleeping peacefully until the door slammed open. His eyes moved from the bassinets to Tamrin, taking in her exhausted state, the hospital gown, the clear signs of recent childbirth. Then his gaze landed on Brennan. Brennan had risen from his chair the moment Dalton appeared. He now stood between Dalton and Tamrin's bed, his posture calm but unmistakably protective. His expression was controlled, measured, but his body language was clear. He was a barrier between this angry man and his family. "What is this?" Dalton's voice dropped to something dangerous, quiet in a way that was somehow more threatening than his shouting. "This is none of your business," Brennan said, his voice calm and even. "And who the hell are you?" Dalton took another step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Brennan's face. Recognition dawned slowly. "Wait. I know you. You're that CEO. The billionaire with the medical foundation." His laugh was ugly, broken, disbelieving. "You've got to be kidding me." He turned back to Tamrin, his expression morphing from shock to something that looked almost like betrayal, as if he had the right to feel betrayed. "This is what you left me for." Dalton's finger jabbed toward Brennan, toward the babies, toward everything Tamrin had built in the year since she'd escaped him. A rich man who could give you things I couldn't? That's what this was about. His voice was climbing again, filling the room with accusation. You threw away our marriage so you could trade up, so you could find someone with a bigger bank account? He was trying to make this about money, trying to rewrite the story one more time, to twist the narrative until he became the victim and she became the gold digger. It was the same script he'd always used: take the truth and distort it until it served his purposes. But this time, something was different. This time, Tamrin didn't shrink. Strength flooded through her body, strength she had forgotten she possessed. The woman who had cowered for 7 years was gone. The woman who had apologized for existing, who had made herself smaller and quieter and less to accommodate his ego, no longer existed. In her place was someone who had been broken and rebuilt herself stronger. I left you because you cheated on me. Her voice rang clear and direct. No trembling, no uncertainty. Just truth. Dalton's mouth opened, ready with some excuse or justification, but she wasn't finished. I left because you spent 7 years making me feel small and worthless, because you isolated me from my friends, because you killed my dreams and called it protection, because you convinced me that I was the problem when you were the one destroying us from the inside out. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam, and she couldn't have stopped them if she wanted to. I left because I finally remembered who I was before you tried to erase me. I remembered that I had value, that I deserved to be loved, not controlled, that I was allowed to take up space in the world without apologizing for it. Dalton tried to interrupt, his face reddening with anger. You don't know. The single word cut through his attempted rebuttal. You don't get to talk anymore. You've had 7 years to talk, to twist things, to make me believe that your abuse was my fault. I'm done listening. The room had gone completely silent, except for her voice. That wasn't love, Dalton. What you did to me, that wasn't love. That was possession. That was ownership. You tried to turn me into something you could control, and when I wouldn't stay controlled, you punished me for it. She gestured toward the 3 bassinets, toward Brennan, toward the life she had built. And I am done being possessed. I am done being your victim. I am done carrying the weight of your choices and calling it my burden. Dalton stood frozen, his usual arsenal of manipulations seemingly depleted. The man who always had an answer, who could twist any truth into her fault, who could make her doubt her own reality, he had nothing to say, because for the first time, she wasn't giving him room to speak. She was taking up all the space in the conversation, and he didn't know how to exist in a world where she refused to make herself smaller. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of pain and manipulation finally being named for what they were. Security guards appeared in the doorway, hospital protocol triggered by the shouting and commotion. They moved toward Dalton, hands out, voices calm but firm. Sir, we're going to need you to leave. But Brennan held up a hand, stopping them. Give us a moment, he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made the guards pause, uncertain. Brennan turned to face Dalton fully. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. I understand why you're angry. The opening was not what anyone expected, least of all Dalton, whose expression shifted from fury to confusion. Losing Tamrin must feel like losing the best thing that ever happened to you, Brennan continued, his voice calm and measured. Because she is. She's extraordinary. She's compassionate and brilliant and stronger than anyone I've ever met. He paused, letting the words settle. But you had your chance, Dalton. 7 years. And you spent every single one of them trying to diminish her light instead of marveling at how brightly she shone. Dalton's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You don't know anything about our marriage. I know enough. Brennan took a step closer, still calm, still measured, but there was steel underneath the quiet words. I know that she flinches when someone raises their voice. Even now, even with me, there's still a shadow of fear that crosses her face when voices get loud. You trained that into her. I know that she apologizes constantly for having opinions, for taking up space, for having needs. She says, I'm sorry, before asking for the smallest things. like she's afraid that existing too loudly will make people leave. Each observation landed like a physical blow. Dalton's face was changing, the anger giving way to something that might have been shame if he was capable of feeling it. I know it took her months to believe that she deserved to be happy, Brennan continued. Months to accept that being loved didn't mean being controlled. Months to trust that I wouldn't use her vulnerabilities as weapons against her. He stepped even closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. You did that to her. You took a vibrant, confident woman and systematically broke her down until she didn't recognize herself anymore. You called it love, but it was possession. You called it protection, but it was prison. Something flickered in Dalton's expression, something that looked almost like recognition, almost like shame, but it was buried too deep beneath layers of pride and defensiveness to truly surface. Brennan wasn't finished. This woman, he gestured toward Tamrin without taking his eyes off Dalton, rebuilt herself from the rubble you left behind. She found the courage to leave when leaving felt impossible. She found the strength to dream again when you'd convinced her that her dreams didn't matter. She found the capacity to love again when you'd taught her that love was just another word for control. His voice softened, but the words hit just as hard. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows exactly how valuable she is, making sure she never doubts her worth again, making sure she understands that real love doesn't diminish, it amplifies, it doesn't control, it liberates. Brennan turned back to Tamrin, his expression softening completely. His whole body language changed when he looked at her, from warrior to protector to partner. I'm not here to compete with your past, he said to her, though his words were loud enough for Dalton to hear. I'm here to be your future. Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'm here. Tamrin looked at the man standing before her, the man who had shown her what real love looked like, who had waited patiently while she healed, who had never once made her feel like her brokenness was a burden. Then she looked at the man still hovering in the doorway, the man who had spent 7 years trying to shrink her into something manageable, who had called his control love and his possession protection. The contrast was stark and undeniable. One had taken everything from her. The other had given her back to herself. One had demanded she become less. The other had encouraged her to become more. The choice was not a choice at all. Dalton, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Certain. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for. I genuinely do. She took a breath. I hope someday you learn to love someone without trying to own them. I hope you figure out that people aren't possessions to be controlled, but individuals to be cherished. Her hand found Brennan's, their fingers intertwining naturally. But you won't find what you're looking for here. This chapter of my life, the one where you had any say in my choices, any claim on my time, any power over my happiness, that chapter is over. It ended the day I signed the divorce papers. She looked him directly in the eyes. Please, leave. Dalton stood frozen for a long moment. His eyes moved between Tamrin and Brennan, then to the 3 bassinets holding the babies, who would never know him, never be touched by his particular brand of toxic love. He was looking at the life he could have had if only he had been different. If only he had chosen to build her up instead of tear her down. If only he had understood that love was about freedom, not chains. But understanding came too late, and some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Without another word, Dalton turned and walked out of the room. The security guards flanked him, escorting him down the hallway and out of the hospital. Out of Tamrin's life. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like finality. For a long moment, nobody moved. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle breathing of 3 sleeping babies. Then Tamrin let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. And for the first time in years, maybe for the first time in her entire adult life, she felt completely, utterly, absolutely free. Later that night, after the chaos had finally settled, the hospital room returned to a peaceful quiet. The security guards had long since escorted Dalton from the building. The nurses had completed their rounds, checking vitals and adjusting monitors before dimming the lights. The world outside the window had gone dark, the city lights twinkling in the distance like earthbound stars. Brennan sat in the chair beside Tamrin's bed, one of their daughters cradled carefully in his arms. The baby, they hadn't chosen names yet, had barely had time to breathe, before Dalton's intrusion, was impossibly small against his broad chest. Her tiny fingers curled around his thumb, holding on with surprising strength. Tamrin watched them, her heart so full it physically ached. This man, this beautiful, patient, extraordinary man who had waited for her to be ready, who had shown up consistently without demanding anything in return, who had just defended her against the ghost of her past with quiet strength and absolute certainty. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the quiet. Brennan looked up, his expression questioning. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I never wanted my past to follow me here, to touch what we've built, to—" "Stop." His voice was gentle but firm, not commanding, just certain. "Your past is part of what made you who you are, Tamrin. Every struggle, every scar, every moment of pain that you survived, it all shaped the woman I fell in love with." He shifted the baby carefully, reaching out to take Tamrin's hand with his free one. "I'm not interested in a woman without history, without depth, without evidence of battles fought and won." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm interested in you, all of you, every chapter, including the difficult ones, especially the difficult ones." Tamrin felt tears building again, but these were different from the ones she'd shed earlier. These were warm. "How are you real?" she asked softly. His smile was tired but warm, creasing the corners of his eyes. "I could ask you the same thing." A nurse entered to check on the babies, her movements quiet and efficient. She checked each bassinet, made notes on her clipboard, and slipped out with a soft smile at the new parents. When she was gone, Brennan shifted the sleeping baby back into her bassinet, with the careful movements of a man terrified of breaking something precious. Once she was settled, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Tamrin's breath caught. "I know I already proposed," he said, a hint of embarrassment coloring his voice. "In a bathroom, without a ring, probably smelling like hospital disinfectant and coffee. Not exactly the romantic proposal I had planned." She laughed softly, tears already forming. "It was perfect. It was chaotic," he corrected with a grin. "But I meant every word. And I never got to give you this." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, unlike anything Tamrin had expected. Not a massive diamond meant to impress or display wealth. Instead, it was a delicate band of white gold with 3 small stones set into the metal, intertwined, inseparable, each one catching the dim light. "The jeweler called it a trinity ring," Brennan explained softly. "One stone for each of our children, one commitment that binds us all together." He lifted the ring from its cushion and held it toward her. "This ring represents what we're building, Tamrin. Not perfection, because perfection is boring and unrealistic, but partnership, not a fairy tale, because real life is messier and more beautiful than any story. But something real, something that will weather storms and celebrate sunshine in equal measure." His eyes met hers, and she saw everything there: love, commitment, hope, certainty. A love that sees your cracks and fills them with gold instead of criticism. A love that celebrates your strength instead of trying to diminish it. A love that— "Yes," she interrupted, laughing through her tears. "You already asked. I already said yes. Now put the ring on my finger before I start sobbing and wake up all 3 babies." Brennan laughed, that warm, genuine laugh she had fallen in love with, and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. Tamrin held up her hand, watching the 3 stones catch the light. 3 children. 3 new lives. 3 reasons to believe that the future could be brighter than the past. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more," he replied. "And I'm going to spend a lifetime proving it." They were married 3 months later in an intimate ceremony at sunset. No grand spectacle. No hundreds of guests they barely knew. Just the people who mattered most. Tamrin's mother, who cried through the entire ceremony. Brennan's closest friends from the foundation. Maya, who served as maid of honor. and threatened to take Brennan out if he ever hurt her best friend. Tamrin wore a dress she had chosen herself, in colors as bright and bold as her. Spirit, cream silk with accents of gold that matched the ring on her finger. No muted tones, no apologizing for taking up space. The triplets, Grayson, Truitt, and Mireille, were 3 months old, dressed in matching outfits, and somehow managed to sleep through their parents' vows. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Brennan kissed Tamrin with the same gentle certainty he'd shown the very first time, a question and an answer, a promise and a commitment. The years that followed were not perfect. No life is. There were sleepless nights with 3 crying babies. Financial pressures, despite Brennan's wealth. Moments of frustration and exhaustion and doubt. But through it all, there was partnership. There was respect. There was love that built up rather than tore down. Grayson, Truitt, and Mireille grew up in a home filled with laughter and honesty. They learned early that their mother was strong, not despite her past, but because of it. They learned that their father was devoted, not to control, but to support. They knew they were born into a love story that almost didn't happen, a story that required courage and healing and the willingness to try again. But it did happen, because their mother chose herself, because their father recognized her worth when she couldn't see it, because sometimes the universe has a way of bringing the right people together at exactly the right time. Years later, when the triplets were old enough to understand, Tamrin Oakes Holt gathered her children around her. She told them the story of how their family began, not to dwell in the pain of the past, but to illuminate the path forward. Not to burden them with her struggles, but to arm them with wisdom. These were the lessons she passed down, lessons written in her own survival, paid for with her own tears, earned through her own transformation. The first lesson: know your worth. Never let anyone else define it for you. No one who truly loves you will ever try to make you feel less than you are, she told them. Love should elevate you. It should make you feel like the best version of yourself, not the smallest. She explained how real love expands your world rather than shrinking it, how it encourages your dreams rather than dismissing them, how it celebrates your strengths rather than exploiting your weaknesses. If someone's love makes you smaller, she said, it isn't love at all, it's theft. They're stealing pieces of you and calling it affection. The right person will make you feel like you can conquer the world. The wrong one will make you feel like you don't deserve to try. The second lesson: it's never too late to begin again. Tamrin was 31 years old when she divorced Dalton, 34, and convinced that her best days were behind her, that the fairy tale was for other people, that she had used up her chances and would spend the rest of her life alone with her regrets. She was wrong. Every ending carries the seed of a new beginning, she told her children. You are never too old, too broken, or too far gone to start over. The story isn't finished until you decide it is. Her new beginning had started with a coffee collision in a hospital lobby, proof that life has a sense of humor and timing that we can't always understand. The third lesson: healing is not a straight line. There were still days, even years later, when Tamrin heard Dalton's voice in her head. Still moments when old insecurities crept in like uninvited guests, whispering that she wasn't enough, that she was too much, that she didn't deserve the happiness she'd found. But I learned to recognize those whispers as lies, she told her children. I learned to choose truth, even when the lies felt louder, even when they felt more familiar. Healing isn't about never struggling. It's about struggling less often, recovering more quickly, knowing that the dark moments will pass because they've passed before. The fourth lesson: forgiveness is not about the other person. Eventually, Tamrin forgave Dalton, not because he apologized, he never did, not because he deserved it, he didn't, but because carrying bitterness was too heavy a burden for the life she wanted to live. Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was okay, she explained. It doesn't mean you have to let them back into your life or pretend they didn't hurt you. It means you're choosing to set down the weight, to stop letting their actions poison your present, to choose freedom over revenge, peace over resentment. Forgiveness was something she did for herself, not for Dalton. The fifth lesson: real love waits for you to be ready. Brennan had never rushed her, never demanded that she heal faster, trust sooner, love harder. He had simply shown up, consistently, faithfully, patiently, until she felt safe enough to open her heart again. The right love doesn't force its way in, Tamrin told her children. It doesn't break down your walls or demand immediate access to your soul. It waits at the door, gently knocking, until you're ready to answer. The triplets grew up with these lessons embedded in their hearts. They learned that their mother had once been broken and had rebuilt herself into something stronger. They learned that their father had seen someone extraordinary when the world tried to convince her she was ordinary. And they learned, most importantly, that every ending is just a beginning in disguise. Sometimes the storm has to clear everything away before the garden can truly bloom. And that, my friends, is how a woman who lost herself found something even more precious. Not just a man who loved her, but herself. Not just a family, but freedom. Not just a happy ending, but a happy beginning. Tamrin Oakes. Holt's story reminds us of something essential. We are never defined by our worst relationships. We are never limited by the people who tried to break us or the circumstances that tried to defeat us. We are defined by how we rise after we fall, by the courage it takes to try again when trying again feels impossible, by the wisdom to recognize real love when it finally finds us, even if it arrives disguised as a coffee stain on an expensive shirt. Now I want to hear from you, because I don't tell these stories just for entertainment. I tell them because they matter, because somewhere out there, someone watching this needed to hear exactly these words at exactly this moment. Maybe that someone is you. So let me ask you directly, which lesson struck the deepest chord in your heart today? Have you ever experienced a love that made you lose yourself and found your way back? What would you have said to Dalton in that hospital room? Or maybe you have your own story of rising from darkness into light, your own journey from being broken to being rebuilt. I want to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I respond to as many as I can. This community isn't just about watching stories, it's about connecting with each other. It's about knowing that we're not alone in our struggles or our victories. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. If you want more stories like this one, stories that don't just entertain but transform, stories with meaning and morals and messages that stay with you long after the video ends, subscribe to Mr. Roman's Story Vault and hit that notification bell, because we're building something special here, a community of people who believe in the power of stories to change lives, to heal wounds, to remind us of truths we've forgotten. Welcome to the family, and remember this, your story isn't over, no matter what chapter you're in right now. No matter how dark or difficult or hopeless it might seem, the best chapter might be the very next one. Keep turning the pages. I'll see you in the next story.